Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Easy English Spark. I'm so excited to have you here today. In this session, we'll dive into an inspiring story about Lily, a woman who faced challenges and made life-changing decisions, just like how you're working to improve your English listening and speaking skills. As we explore her journey, we'll also focus on how you can enhance your English fluency and build confidence every step of the way. So, let's get started and light up your English journey together. Chapter 1: Struggles of a Single Parent. Lily sat at her kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee in front of her, staring at the bills that had piled up over the past month. It seemed like the same routine every week. Her life was a constant battle against time and money. There was no money left for anything except the essentials, and sometimes even those were hard to manage. Her two young children, Sarah and Max, were running around the living room, their laughter echoing through the small apartment. As much as she loved them, the noise, the mess, and the never-ending demands were becoming overwhelming. Lily's heart ached every time she saw them. They deserved so much more than this cramped apartment, more than her constant stress, more than the worrying looks she had to put on just to make them feel safe. But life had become a series of hurdles she could barely get over. She had no job, no steady income, and worst of all, no partner to help shoulder the burden. Her marriage had fallen apart a year ago, and she hadn't been able to pick up the pieces since. The divorce had left her drained, both emotionally and financially. Her ex-husband barely helped, leaving her to carry the weight of it all. Every morning was the same. She woke up early to get Sarah and Max ready for school, making sure they had everything they needed. Then, after dropping them off, she spent the rest of her day combing through job listings online, making calls, and trying to land an interview. But the phone calls came to nothing. Her resume, though filled with experience, wasn't enough to break through the flood of applicants for every available position. She had sent out dozens of applications, attended interviews, but each time she heard the same disappointing words. "Thank you for your time, but we've chosen another candidate," Lily felt like she was trapped in a cycle. Every rejection, every unanswered call made the weight on her chest heavier. She had tried everything she could think of, going back to school for a new certification, networking with anyone who might have a connection, even considering part-time or temporary work. But nothing worked. There was no way out of this hole she had dug herself into, and every day the walls felt like they were closing in. The fear started to creep in during the quiet moments, when she tucked the kids into bed and kissed their foreheads goodnight. How much longer could she keep going like this? How much longer could she pretend that everything was okay? She didn't want to burden Sarah and Max with her worries, But how could she hide the constant anxiety that ate at her every waking moment? Her children deserved better. They deserved a mother who didn't spend every day battling the demons of financial instability, the fear of never finding a job, the stress of figuring out how to make it all work. But even in the midst of all the stress, Lily refused to give up. She couldn't. She wasn't about to let her children feel the weight of her failures. No matter how difficult things got, she always made sure they were fed, clothed, and loved. She had to keep fighting. But the fight was getting harder, and the exhaustion was starting to show. Her eyes were heavy, and her shoulders ached from carrying so much for so long. Lily knew she had to find a way out. But what? Where was she supposed to go from here? The future seemed uncertain, and every door she knocked on seemed to be closed. She needed a breakthrough, something, anything, that could help her make a real change. She didn't know how she was going to find it, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to give up. Not now, not ever. The next morning, as she sat on the edge of her bed, tying her shoes and preparing for another day of fruitless job hunting, she made a promise to herself. Today, she would find a way. Today, she would make a change. Lily was determined. She had to be. For Sarah, for Max, for herself. It was time to stop just surviving and start living again. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but Lily was ready to face whatever challenges came her way. As she stepped out the door, closing it softly behind her, she couldn't help but feel a spark of hope deep inside her. Maybe today was the day something would finally change. Chapter 2. A Desperate Move. Lily knew she had reached the end of her rope. Another round of unanswered applications, another fruitless day of endless searching. Her mind felt like a constant whirlpool of frustration and desperation. The bills kept stacking up, and each passing day only added to her growing sense of helplessness. She had always been a fighter, but even the strongest soldiers break under enough pressure, and she could feel herself starting to crack. It was late in the Eastside afternoon, and Lily had just returned from picking up Sarah and Max from school. The kids were laughing and chatting excitedly about their day, but Lily's mind wasn't really there. She nodded, smiled, and asked the usual questions. But inside, she was somewhere far away, consumed by the weight of her situation. After dinner, as the kids settled down for the night, Lily sat down on the couch, trying to figure out what to do next. She opened her laptop and once again scrolled through the job listings. There were plenty of opportunities, but none of them seemed like the right fit. She had applied for so many jobs in the past few weeks: retail, customer service, office administration, but nothing seemed to stick. Her resume, while impressive, wasn't enough to stand out in a sea of applicants. Her heart sank as she closed her laptop with a heavy sigh. It was then that her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something inside her urged her to answer it. "Hello?" she said, her voice strained. "Hi, is this Lily Brooks?" A calm voice on the other end asked. "Yes, this is she. Who's calling?" "This is David Winters. I'm a lawyer, and I understand you've been looking for work. I might have an opportunity for you." Lily sat up straighter, her heart pounding. David Winters. She'd met him once at a community event a few months ago. He was a well-respected lawyer in the city, known for his work in personal injury cases. They'd exchanged a few polite words, but she hadn't thought much of it at the time. "How can I help you?" she asked, trying to sound more composed than she felt. David's voice was warm, but there was an underlying seriousness to it. "I know it's not the typical job offer, but I've been following your situation, and I think you have what it takes. I could use someone like you in my office, someone who's organized, driven, and willing to do whatever it takes to succeed. How would you feel about working with me?" Lily was stunned. She wasn't sure if it was a mistake or if he was just being kind out of pity, but the idea of working with someone like David Winters, someone who could offer her a chance at stability, was too tempting to ignore. Still, there was a part of her that hesitated. Was this a scam? Was she just another person he was trying to take advantage of? "Are you serious?" she finally asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I mean, why me? What do you need me for?" David chuckled softly. "I need someone who is resourceful, someone who isn't afraid to get their hands dirty. The work may not be glamorous, but you'll be helping me with organizing files, doing research, and assisting with various administrative tasks. If you're up for it, we can start small and see where it goes. What do you think?" Lily's mind raced. This wasn't what she had planned, but it was an opportunity, a chance to prove herself again. It wasn't exactly what she'd imagined for her career, but beggars couldn't be choosers. She'd never imagined herself working in a law office, but at this point, she was willing to try anything that could bring in some income and give her a sense of purpose. "Okay, I'll do it," Lily said, her voice full of resolve. "I'll come in tomorrow and meet you." David's voice was full of approval. "Great. I'll see you at 9 a.m. sharp. Don't worry, Lily. You won't regret this." The call ended, and Lily sat back, her heart racing. This was it. It wasn't much, but it was something. She had a chance, a small but real opportunity. She didn't know what the job would bring or how long it would last, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the break she had been waiting for. The next morning, Lily woke up early, her nerves making it hard to sleep the night before. She prepared breakfast for Sarah and Max, getting them ready for school, all while running through the details of her new job in her head. She wasn't sure exactly what her role would be, but she was determined to make a good impression. After dropping the kids off, Lily made her way to David's office. The building was an old, well-established law firm in the downtown area, a far cry from the humble apartment she lived in. The polished brass door handle gleamed as she pushed it open, stepping into the sleek lobby. She was greeted by a receptionist who directed her to David's office on the second floor. As she walked down the hall, she couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and apprehension. She had no legal background, no formal training in law, but she knew she had the work ethic to succeed. This was her chance to prove that she was capable, that she could contribute and carve out a space for herself in this unfamiliar world. David greeted her warmly when she entered his office, and they spent the next few minutes discussing her tasks. It wasn't glamorous work, mostly organizing documents, answering phones, and making calls, but Lily didn't mind. She had no illusions about where she was starting, but this was a step forward. She could feel it. The first few days were a blur of paperwork and phone calls, but Lily quickly proved herself to be an efficient and reliable worker. She learned the ins and outs of the office, familiarizing herself with the system and the different cases David was handling. It wasn't exactly exciting work, but it was steady, and it gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. By the end of the week, Lily felt like she had found her rhythm. The work was starting to feel less overwhelming, and she was becoming more confident in her abilities. There was still so much to learn, but she was grateful for the opportunity. As she sat at her desk, organizing files and preparing documents, she realized that this job, while not glamorous, was giving her something far more important, a sense of security. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was just surviving. She was starting to live again, and this, she thought to herself, was only the beginning. Chapter 3. Starting Over. Lily's first week at the law office was a whirlwind of new faces, unfamiliar tasks, and a constant stream of paperwork. The quiet hum of the office, the clicking of keyboards, and the murmur of conversations between lawyers and their assistants filled the air, but to Lily it all felt like an overwhelming blur. It was a far cry from the chaos of her home life, but the structure and routine of the office were both comforting and daunting. For the first time in what seemed like years, she felt like she was finally doing something with purpose. She had no experience in law, no background in office administration, and certainly no idea of how things worked in a professional legal setting, but Lily was determined to learn. She arrived at the office every morning with a mix of excitement and nervousness. She was still new, still an outsider, but she had an inner drive that wouldn't let her quit. David Winters, her employer, was patient and kind. He had set her up with a small desk by the window where she could organize client files, manage office supplies, and assist with basic clerical tasks. The work was routine, sorting documents, entering information into the system, filing papers, answering phone calls, but it gave her something to hold on to, something to focus on. As the days passed, Lily started to get into a rhythm. She quickly learned how to navigate the filing system, how to answer calls professionally, and how to draft simple emails. The office was bustling, with clients coming and going, and the atmosphere felt different from the world she had known. It was a place where things got done, where problems were solved, and where people wore suits and spoke in a language Lily wasn't quite fluent in yet. But she was adapting, learning by watching, by listening, and by doing. Her colleagues, though polite, were mostly indifferent. They didn't seem to think much of her. She wasn't one of them, not yet. The office culture was firmly established, and Lily felt like an outsider in a world that was moving faster than she could keep up. The other assistants seemed to have it all figured out. They knew how to manage client expectations, how to handle difficult cases, and how to blend seamlessly into the team. Lily, on the other hand, felt like she was still learning the ropes, still trying to prove herself. Every day she asked questions, took notes, and tried her best to stay out of the way. But it wasn't easy. David, however, saw something in her. He noticed her work ethic, her dedication, and her willingness to go above and beyond. He didn't mind that she wasn't familiar with the legal jargon or that she didn't have any formal training. What mattered was that she was trying. She showed up every day on time, stayed late when necessary, and did the work without complaining. She was exactly the kind of person he needed in his office, someone who was dependable, eager to learn, and willing to grow. One afternoon, David called Lily into his office. Her heart skipped a beat. Had she done something wrong? Was she not meeting expectations? "Lily, can you close the door?" David asked, looking up from his desk with a serious expression. Lily stepped inside and did as he asked, her palms sweating. "Slightly." David leaned back in his chair and regarded her for a moment. "I've been watching you and I'm impressed. You're learning quickly and you're handling the work well. But I think you're capable of more." Lily's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure what he meant. "More? More than what?" David continued, his voice calm but encouraging. "I want to give you more responsibility. You've been doing the work of an assistant, but I think you're ready for something more. We have a new case coming in next week, and I could use your help with the research and organizing the documents. It's a big case, and it'll be a great opportunity for you to learn more about the legal process." Lily was taken aback. She hadn't expected this. She was still getting comfortable with the basics. How could she possibly take on something bigger? But David's confidence in her was reassuring. He believed in her, and that was enough to spark something inside her. "Of course, I'd love to help," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'll do my best." David nodded, smiling. "I know you will. I'm giving you a chance because I believe you can handle it. Don't hesitate to ask if you need help, but I have faith that you'll figure it out. This is your opportunity to show what you can do." Lily left David's office that day with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. This was her chance to prove herself, not just to David, but to herself. She wasn't just the single mother struggling to make ends meet anymore. She was someone who had a future, a career, and the potential to make a real impact. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was a step forward, a chance to turn the page on the difficult chapter of her life. The next week, the new case arrived, a complex property dispute between a large corporation and a small local community. It was a case that would require hours of research, review of legal documents, and careful attention to detail. Lily threw herself into the work, staying late after everyone else had gone home. She read through the case files, cross-referenced details, and took notes on everything. It was challenging, but it was also exciting. For the first time in a long time, Lily felt like she was doing something meaningful. As the days turned into weeks, Lily's confidence grew. She was no longer just the assistant who sorted papers and answered calls. She was now an active participant in the case, contributing ideas, assisting with strategy, and even providing input during team meetings. Her knowledge of the case deepened, and she found herself developing a real understanding of how the legal world worked. The office, which had once felt intimidating and foreign, was now a place where she felt like she truly belonged. Despite her growing responsibilities at work, Lily never lost sight of her children. Every night, she would rush home to be with Sarah and Max, helping them with their homework, making dinner, and tucking them into bed. Her job didn't change the fact that she was still a mother, still the one who had to juggle it all. But she was starting to find a balance, learning how to manage her time, how to prioritize, and how to take care of herself as well as her family. One evening, as she sat at the kitchen table after the kids had gone to bed, Lily reflected on how far she had come. The job was still challenging, but she was no longer overwhelmed by it. The fear of not being good enough was fading, replaced by a growing sense of competence and confidence. She had started over, not just in her career, but in her life. And though there were still many challenges ahead, Lily was ready to face them head-on. She had proven to herself that she was capable, that she could take on more than she had ever thought possible. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was a life she could be proud of, and that was enough for now. Chapter 4. The Mystery Unfolds. Lily was beginning to settle into her routine at the office, though the work was still challenging. She had learned to juggle the demands of her job with her responsibilities at home, but there was still a lingering feeling that something was missing. She loved her children with all her heart, and she appreciated the opportunity to work at David Winter's office. But there were days when she felt restless, like something bigger was out there waiting for her, something that could change everything. Little did she know that change was about to come in the most unexpected way. It started with a pile of files. Late one evening, after most of the office had emptied out, Lily stayed behind to catch up on some administrative work. She was alone in the quiet office, the low hum of the fluorescent lights her only company as she sorted through a stack of paperwork that had been left behind by one of the senior associates. It wasn't particularly exciting work, just the usual mix of client documents, contracts, and legal memos. But then, hidden beneath the usual paperwork, Lily came across something that caught her eye. The folder was thick, filled with various papers marked in bold red ink, and the name on the top was unfamiliar. Eastfield Water Contamination, it read. The title immediately piqued her curiosity. She had never heard of Eastfield before, but the mention of water contamination was enough to make her pause. Her eyes scanned the first few pages. More notes about a case involving a local town and a large corporation. It was just another legal case, or so it seemed at first glance. But something in the wording of the notes unsettled her. The documents described how a company named Northern Electric had been involved in buying up property in a small town, Eastfield, which was located near a power station. The town had been dealing with mysterious health issues for years, with residents complaining of unusual illnesses and high rates of cancer. The company was interested in purchasing the residents' homes, but it was the way the documents were written that made Lily's heart race. The health records of the residents seemed to be mixed in with the property documents, and there were mentions of water contamination in the area. Lily's brow furrowed as she flipped through the pages. Some of the records were difficult to read, but others were clear enough. Notes about the water supply being unsafe and contaminated with hazardous materials. Her mind raced as she connected the dots. There was something here, something deeper than just a legal dispute over property. The documents hinted at a cover-up, something sinister, and it wasn't just about property sales. The health records weren't just collateral damage, they were tied to something much darker. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the papers spread out on her desk. The feeling of unease gnawed at her. Why would these documents be mixed together? Why would a company like Northern Electric have health records of residents in the same files as property sales agreements? And why wasn't anyone talking about it? She could sense that there was more to this case than the office was letting. Lily couldn't ignore the growing sense of suspicion that tugged at her. She knew she had to dig deeper, but at the same time, she was afraid. She wasn't a lawyer. She had no training in investigative work or legal strategy. She was just a single mother trying to keep her head above water. But something inside her wouldn't let go of the questions swirling in her mind. She had to know more. The next day, Lily went back to the files and started going through them more carefully. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she uncovered more and more details. The town of Eastfield had been struggling for years. There were reports of widespread illness, especially among the children, and the number of health problems seemed to correlate with the proximity to Northern Electric's power station. The company was offering to buy up properties in the town. But why? Why would they be so eager to purchase homes from residents who were clearly in distress? Lily couldn't stop thinking about the people in Eastfield. What had happened to them? Were they all really just a coincidence? Her thoughts raced as she pieced together the fragments of information she had gathered. And then, one file in particular caught her eye, a report from a local doctor detailing the illnesses in the area. The report described symptoms consistent with chemical poisoning: nausea, dizziness, and unexplained rashes. The illnesses were linked to the water supply, which had been contaminated with something toxic. And what was more alarming was that the company, Northern Electric, had been aware of the contamination for years, but had never made any effort to address it. In fact, they had done everything in their power to keep it quiet. Lily's stomach turned. The company wasn't just buying up homes, they were covering up a deadly secret. The people of Eastfield were sick, and no one was doing anything about it. The more Lily read, the more she realized how deep the corruption went. Northern Electric had been poisoning the water, and it wasn't just an accident. It was a deliberate act, part of a calculated plan to avoid responsibility and save money. The company knew about the contamination, but had chosen to keep it hidden, to avoid costly cleanup efforts. Lily felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She couldn't believe what she was reading. This was not just a legal case. It was a matter of life and death. The people of Eastfield had been suffering, and no one had cared. But now, Lily had the proof. She had the documents, the reports, and the medical evidence. She was sitting on a story that could change everything. Her hands shook as she picked up the phone. She knew what she had to do next. She couldn't ignore this. She had to find out more. She needed to talk to someone who could help her understand the full scope of what was happening in Eastfield. She needed to talk to David. Lily spent the next few hours gathering her thoughts and preparing for the conversation. She wasn't sure how David would react. She didn't want to sound like she was overreacting, but the evidence was right there in front of her. There was no denying it. The people of Eastfield needed help, and Lily was the only one who knew the truth. As the sun began to set, Lily dialed David's number. Her heart was racing, but she knew she had to take this step. She had found something that could make a difference, something that could change the lives of the people in Eastfield. And she wasn't going to let it slip away. David, she said when he answered, "I think I've found something. Something big. You need to see this." David's voice was calm but curious. "What have you got, Lily?" Lily took a deep breath and began to explain what she had discovered. She told him about the documents, the contaminated water, and the company's cover-up. As she spoke, she could hear the shift in David's voice, the growing seriousness in his tone. "Lily," he said when she finished, "this is huge. You've just stumbled onto something that could change everything. We need to investigate this further. I'll help you every step of the way." Lily felt a wave of relief wash over her. She wasn't alone in this. She had someone who believed in her, someone who could help her navigate the difficult road ahead. The mystery was just beginning, but Lily was ready. Ready to uncover the truth. Ready to fight for the people of Eastfield, and she knew deep down that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than she could have ever imagined. Chapter 5. Unraveling the Clues. The following days felt like a blur of urgency and determination as Lily, with David's guidance, dove deeper into the investigation. After their phone conversation, David made it clear that they had to proceed carefully. This wasn't just about legal documents and case files. It was about lives. The people of Eastfield were suffering, and Lily knew they were running out of time. David had already scheduled a meeting with a few of his trusted colleagues, people who were well-versed in environmental law and public health issues. Lily felt a sense of weight on her shoulders, knowing that they were about to uncover something that could shake an entire community. She couldn't back down now. Her sense of duty to the people of Eastfield had grown too strong, and with every piece of information, her resolve solidified. The first thing Lily did the following morning was visit David's office. She arrived early, a quiet determination in her eyes, and walked straight to the desk where the Eastfield case files were laid out in front of her. David had asked her to prepare a timeline of events, how long the contamination had been happening, when the first health complaints were filed, and how the company had responded, or rather, how it had avoided responding. Lily spread the documents out in front of her. As she read through the dates, something jumped out at her. The contamination had been ongoing for almost 2 decades, but the official reports from Northern Electric only acknowledged the problem in the past 2 years. What had they been doing all that time? Why hadn't they been more transparent with the public especially when there were so many residents suffering from health issues. The company's silence was not just neglect, it was deliberate. She could feel it in her gut. Lily spent hours combing through public health records. She spoke to doctors who had worked in Eastfield for years, piecing together their accounts of the illnesses that had plagued the town. There were reports of children being born with birth defects, families living with unexplained chronic illnesses, and a disturbingly high cancer rate. All of them had one thing in common. They lived in the same area as the power station, where the company had been releasing waste into the local water supply. David's legal team had already begun the groundwork for a class action lawsuit, but Lily's role was different. She wasn't just part of the legal process. She was the one who could connect the dots between the health issues and the water contamination. She was the one who could speak to the families who had been affected, who could gather their stories, their evidence, and bring it all to light. As Lily reached out to more residents of Eastfield, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. It wasn't just the water supply that had been poisoned. Northern Electric had been dumping toxic chemicals into the local river for years, the same river that served as the main water source for the town. The chemicals included chromium-6, a known carcinogen that was linked to severe health issues, including cancer, lung disease, and organ failure. The residents had been drinking it for decades without knowing, believing the water was safe, because no one had told them otherwise. One of the residents Lily spoke to, Margaret Taylor, a woman in her late 60s, had lived in Eastfield her entire life. Margaret's voice trembled with emotion as she recounted how her husband had passed away from cancer just a few years ago. Her eyes welled up as she explained how her neighbors too had been affected. Several had died of similar illnesses, while others were struggling with debilitating diseases. But the worst part was that the people of Eastfield hadn't known why this was happening. It wasn't until recently that they began to suspect the company might be responsible. "I remember hearing that the water was clean," Margaret told Lily, her voice thick with sadness. "They always said it was fine, that it was treated properly. But when people started getting sick, we began to wonder if something wasn't right. But we didn't know what to do about it. We didn't have the money or the power to fight back." Lily sat in silence, her heart aching for Margaret and the entire community. She promised Margaret that she would not let their suffering be in vain, that she would do everything in her power to hold Northern Electric accountable. As the days wore on, Lily and David's team began to piece together a clear pattern. Northern Electric had known about the contamination for years, but had hidden the truth from the residents of Eastfield. They had suppressed reports, manipulated data, and pressured local officials to ignore the problem. The company's priority had always been profit, not people. They didn't want to pay for the cleanup or take responsibility for the damages they had caused. Instead, they were focused on buying up properties in the area, likely to prevent anyone from speaking out or filing lawsuits. Lily's role in this investigation had shifted dramatically. No longer just a research assistant, she had become a key player in uncovering the full extent of the damage. As she dug deeper, she uncovered internal memos from Northern Electric's senior executives. These memos revealed a chilling truth. The company had known about the toxic levels of chromium-6 in the water as far back as the early 1990s. Yet, they continued to allow the contamination to worsen, choosing to keep the information hidden to avoid costly public backlash and environmental fines. It was clear that Northern Electric had put profits over human lives. One evening, as Lily sat at her desk, reviewing a set of emails from Northern Electric's internal communications, she felt a deep sense of anger rising within her. It was clear that they had lied to everyone, lying not only to the people of Eastfield, but to regulators and government officials. They had willfully allowed the residents to live in toxic conditions, knowing full well that the chemicals in the water were slowly poisoning them. Lily felt a surge of determination. She couldn't let this go. She wouldn't let it. These people needed justice, and with the help of David and his legal team, they were going to expose the truth to the world. The more she uncovered, the more the case began to take shape. The evidence was damning. Internal company emails, scientific reports, medical data, testimonies from residents, all pointing to the same conclusion. Northern Electric had knowingly poisoned the water supply in Eastfield for years, with no regard for the health and safety of the people living there. But even as the case grew stronger, so did the stakes. Northern Electric was a powerful corporation with deep pockets and political connections. They weren't going to go down without a fight. Lily knew that the battle ahead was going to be brutal, but she was prepared. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. David, seeing how far Lily had come, pulled her aside one evening. "Lily," he said, his voice full of respect, "you're doing something incredible here. You've uncovered the truth. Now it's time to make sure everyone knows it." Lily nodded, feeling a mix of pride and fear. She was ready. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, and they had the evidence to prove it. The people of Eastfield had been wronged, and it was time to make things right. But there was one thing Lily knew for sure. This was only the beginning. The real fight was still ahead, and it would take everything she had to see it through. Chapter 6. The Growing Commitment. Lily woke up the next morning with a new sense of urgency. The previous days had been a whirlwind of discoveries and revelations. Each piece of evidence she uncovered about Northern Electric's actions only added to the weight of the responsibility she felt. She had known from the moment she stumbled upon the Eastfield case that it would be difficult, but she had never imagined it would take over every aspect of her life so quickly. David had been right. This wasn't just a case. This was a fight for justice, for the people of Eastfield, for those who had suffered for years without knowing the truth. Lily could no longer view this as just a job or an assignment. It was personal now. She felt connected to the residents of Eastfield in a way that she couldn't quite explain. They had trusted her to uncover the truth, and she couldn't let them down. As the weeks passed, Lily's role at David's office expanded. She wasn't just the assistant anymore. She had become a key player in the investigation. Her research, her knowledge of the health records, and her ability to connect with the residents of Eastfield had made her indispensable to the case. David had even started involving her in the legal strategy meetings, much to the surprise of the rest of the legal team. The more time Lily spent on the case, the more deeply she became entrenched in the details. She would spend hours going over documents, cross-referencing timelines, and working with the medical experts David had brought in to assess the damage caused by the water contamination. Her evenings were spent on the phone with Eastfield residents, listening to their stories, recording their testimonies, and reassuring them that justice was coming. One afternoon, while reviewing a stack of medical records, Lily was struck by a detail she had missed before. There was a small group of residents in Eastfield who had received settlements from Northern Electric. It wasn't much, but the company had paid them off, likely to avoid lawsuits. She felt a deep sense of anger welling up inside her. These people had been silenced, bought off with meager amounts of money, and sent on their way, their health problems ignored. But now, Lily had everything she needed to show that this wasn't just a case of negligence. It was a calculated effort to conceal the truth. The evidence was clear. Northern Electric had deliberately and knowingly poisoned the water, and they had been covering it up for years. Lily's determination was growing stronger by the day, but so was her sense of fear. She had been in this fight for weeks now, but each day brought new risks. The more she uncovered, the more powerful enemies she made. Northern Electric was not a small company. They were one of the largest utility providers in the region, with far-reaching political and financial influence. They had the power to bury this case, to intimidate witnesses, and to drag the legal process out for years. Lily had seen the way they worked. They used their resources to wear people down, to force them into silence. She knew the battle ahead would be a long and difficult one. But Lily couldn't back down now. The faces of the people of Eastfield, their hopes and fears, had become a permanent fixture in her mind. She had heard their stories, seen their pain, and she couldn't turn away. She knew that this wasn't just about winning a lawsuit. It was about giving them a voice, a chance to finally be heard after years of suffering and silence. The thought of giving up was impossible. She had started this fight, and she would finish it. One evening, After a particularly grueling day of work, Lily found herself sitting at her kitchen table, staring at a stack of papers she had brought home from the office. She had been going over testimonies from Eastfield residents, and as the clock ticked past midnight, she began to feel the weight of the case pressing down on her. It was overwhelming at times, the enormity of it all, the number of people who had been affected, the lives that had been destroyed by the company's greed and negligence. But as she looked at the papers in front of her, something clicked. The stories she had been hearing, the evidence she had uncovered, the documents she had been reading, they all came together, forming a narrative that could not be ignored. Northern Electric had tried to bury the truth, but Lily was starting to expose it, piece by piece. They could try to deny it, they could try to cover it up, but the truth was on her side. It was then that Lily made a promise to herself. She wasn't just going to help David win this case. She was going to make sure that Northern Electric paid for what they had done. She was going to hold them accountable, and she wasn't going to let anything stop her. The following week, David called her into his office for a meeting. He had some important news. They were ready to move forward with the lawsuit. They had gathered enough evidence, and they had a strong case. It was time to make it official, to take the fight to the next level. But David didn't sugarcoat it. This was going to be a battle. Northern Electric would fight back with everything they had. The company's lawyers would do everything they could to discredit their case, to bury the evidence, and to wear them down. But David had faith in Lily. He had seen the way she had thrown herself into the case, the way she had become its heart and soul. "You've come a long way, Lily," David said, looking at her with a mix of respect and admiration. "This is your case just as much as it is mine. I've never seen someone so committed to a cause like you are. You've earned the right to take this fight to the next level. We'll win this, but it's going to take everything we've got." Lily's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and anxiety. She wasn't just working for David anymore. She was fighting for the people of Eastfield, for those who had been silenced and ignored for far too long. She had committed herself to this cause, and there was no turning back. The legal strategy meetings grew more intense as David's team began to prepare for the upcoming battle. The evidence was strong, but Lily knew that the real fight wasn't going to be won in the courtroom alone. It would be won by exposing the truth, by making sure the public knew what Northern Electric had done. She began reaching out to journalists, environmental activists, and local community leaders to rally support for the people of Eastfield. She knew that the more attention they could draw to the case, the harder it would be for Northern Electric to sweep it under the rug. Lily's commitment to the case grew deeper with each passing day. Every phone call she made, every document she reviewed, and every conversation she had with the people of Eastfield was another step closer to justice. It was exhausting work, and she still had to balance it with her responsibilities as a mother. But Lily was determined. She knew that this case was bigger than her. It was bigger than any of them. As the days turned into weeks, Lily could feel the weight of the case growing heavier on her shoulders, but she refused to falter. She had made a promise to the people of Eastfield, and she was going to see it through, to the end. She couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Not when they were so close to finally exposing the truth. The growing commitment to the cause was no longer just about winning a legal battle. It was about standing up for what was right, fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves, and making sure that those who had caused so much suffering would finally be held accountable. It was a fight for justice, and Lily was ready to take it all the way. Chapter 7. The Decision to Act. Lily woke up to a gray, overcast sky the morning after her meeting with David. The weight of the decision that loomed before her felt heavier with each passing hour. She had spent countless nights poring over the evidence, the legal documents, the medical records, the testimonies from Eastfield's residents. She had walked this path for weeks now, but today felt different. The time had come to make a choice, to keep going or to step back. But deep down, Lily already knew the answer. There was no stepping back. Not now. Every piece of evidence she'd uncovered, every phone call she'd made, had led her to this moment. The health records of the Eastfield residents, the internal memos from Northern Electric, everything pointed to the same horrifying truth. The company had been knowingly poisoning the town's water supply for years, and they had been getting away with it. They had lied, manipulated, and hidden the truth from the people who trusted them. For the first time, Lily fully understood the magnitude of what she was up against. Northern Electric was a massive corporation with powerful legal teams, political connections, and the resources to silence anyone who threatened to expose them. If she moved forward with this case, she was not just going up against a company. She was going up against the very systems of power and influence that allowed companies, like Northern Electric, to act with impunity. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. But it wasn't just about the case anymore. It wasn't just about holding a corporation accountable. It was about the people of Eastfield, those who had lost family members to cancer, those whose children had been born with birth defects, those who had lived in fear and sickness without knowing why. It was about giving them a chance at justice, at redemption, and at healing. They deserved to have their voices heard. Sitting at her kitchen table that morning, a cup of half-finished coffee in front of her, Lily stared at the pile of papers before her. The case had grown so much bigger than she had anticipated. It wasn't just about the legal strategy anymore. It was about the lives of the people who had suffered. The idea of standing by and letting Northern Electric off the hook was unimaginable. And then there was David. He had placed so much trust in her. When she had started working for him, she had simply been an assistant, someone who organized papers and answered phones. But now she was a vital part of this case, a key player in uncovering the truth. She knew that David's faith in her was not misplaced. He believed in her ability to make a difference, to take action and follow through. He was counting on her, and she was counting on him. Together, they had a chance to bring about real change, but only if she made the choice to take that first step into the unknown. Lily stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She needed to talk to someone who could remind her of why she was doing this, who could help her think through the decision. Her mind was racing, and she couldn't make sense of all the pieces on her own. She grabbed her phone and dialed David's number, her hand trembling slightly. The line rang 3 times before he picked up. "Lily?" he said, his voice warm yet tinged with curiosity. "What's on your mind?" "I can't stop thinking about everything we've found," she said, trying to steady her voice. "The documents, the testimonies. It's all so much bigger than I thought. And I know it's going to get ugly. We're not just dealing with a legal case here. This is about power, corruption, and people's lives. I'm scared, David. I don't know if I can handle it." David was quiet for a moment, and Lily could hear the sound of him shifting in his chair. "I understand how you feel, Lily. I won't lie. This is going to be a battle, and it's not going to be easy. But I also know you've got something they don't have. You've got the truth on your side, and you've got a heart that cares about the people of Eastfield. You've already made a difference just by uncovering the truth. Now, it's about taking action, about doing something." With that knowledge, Lily took a deep breath, her mind finally starting to clear. David's words resonated deep within her. She had already uncovered the truth. Now she had to act on it. There was no turning back, not when so many lives were at stake. "I know what I need to do," she said quietly, the decision settling into her chest like a weight lifted. "I'm going to fight. I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure Northern Electric is held accountable. For the people of Eastfield. For the families who've been suffering in silence for far too long." David's voice softened, filled with pride. "That's exactly what I needed to hear, Lily. You've got this. We've got this." The conversation ended, but the resolve in Lily's heart had only grown stronger. She was no longer just researching a case. She was part of something far larger than herself, a movement, a cause, a fight for justice. The decision to act wasn't just about fighting a corporation. It was about standing up for those who had been silenced, for those whose voices had been ignored for too long, but she knew the road ahead would not be easy. Northern Electric would fight back, and they would fight dirty. They would use every tactic at their disposal to delay, discredit, and exhaust her and David's team. They would pressure witnesses, manipulate the media, and drag the case out for as long as possible. But Lily was ready. She had already seen the depths of their corruption. Now it was time to expose it, to hold them accountable for the suffering they had caused. The rest of the day was a blur of phone calls and meetings. David was already setting things in motion, preparing the legal documents, gathering the team, and lining up expert witnesses. But Lily knew that this wasn't just about legal action. It was about making sure the world knew what was happening in Eastfield. She couldn't just let this be another courtroom battle. She had to make sure the media knew the truth. She had to make sure the public knew. The more people who knew about the contamination, the harder it would be for Northern Electric to sweep it under the rug. That night, as she sat with Sarah and Max at the dinner table, Lily felt a wave of clarity wash over her. This wasn't just about her career or even about winning a case. This was about showing her children what it meant to stand up for what's right. She had always told them to be brave, to be kind, to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. But now she realized she had to show them, not just tell them. She was doing it for them. She was doing it for everyone who had ever been silenced, for everyone who had been told their voices didn't matter. She was doing it for Eastfield, and with that thought, Lily made the decision to act, not just for her family, not just for Cy, the people of Eastfield, but for herself. She had become something more than just a mother, just a worker. She had become a warrior for justice. The fight was about to begin, and Lily was ready. Chapter 8. The legal battle begins. The morning of the official filing day dawned cold and crisp. Lily stood in front of the window of David's office, watching the gray clouds roll across the sky. Her hands were pressed against the glass, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Today was the day the legal battle would officially begin. The paperwork was ready. The evidence had been meticulously compiled. The team was in place. Everything had led up to this point. But still, the weight of it all pressed on her. The first filing of the lawsuit against Northern Electric was just the beginning, and Lily knew the real fight was about to unfold. The corporation was not going to go down without a fight. They had the resources, the power, and the lawyers to drag this case out for as long as possible. But Lily had something they didn't: an unshakable belief in justice, and a heart committed to giving the people of Eastfield the justice they so desperately needed. David walked into the room, holding a thick stack of papers. His face was focused, his eyes sharp. He didn't need to say anything. His presence alone spoke volumes. David was a man of few words, But when it came to cases like this, his every action was deliberate, calculated, and powerful. "Ready?" he asked, his voice calm yet filled with a quiet intensity. Lily nodded, swallowing her nerves. "Let's do this," she said, her voice steady but her heart racing. She wasn't just going to sit behind a desk anymore. She was going to fight for Eastfield, for those families, for every single person who had been poisoned by Northern Electric's negligence. The paperwork had been prepared. 634 notices for lawsuits, each one a victim from Eastfield who was demanding accountability. They had gathered the testimonies of over 100 people who had been affected by the contamination. The medical evidence was overwhelming: high rates of cancer, birth defects, chronic illnesses, all linked to the tainted water supply. Northern Electric had tried to bury this truth, but Lily and David were about to make sure the world knew. David handed Lily the first envelope. "This is it," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "You're making history today." Lily held the envelope tightly in her hands, feeling the gravity of the moment. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a declaration of war against the corporation that had caused so much harm. It was a promise to the people of Eastfield that their voices would be heard. She couldn't help but think of the residents: Margaret, the elderly woman who had lost her husband to cancer, or Sarah, the mother who had watched her child grow sick from drinking the contaminated water. These people had waited for far too long, and Lily knew that this was their moment. As Lily and David left the office and made their way to the courthouse, the city around them seemed to blur into the background. The towering buildings, the rush of traffic, it all felt distant, as though they were entering a different world altogether. The legal world. The world where the fight for justice would be decided not with fists or words, but with evidence, strategy, and determination. At the courthouse, they were met with a quiet but palpable tension. The entire legal team was already assembled, prepared for the battle ahead. Some of the senior lawyers had been with David for years, but none of them had seen a case like this. Northern Electric had deep pockets and an army of lawyers, and they wouldn't let this go down easily. Lily could feel the weight of their collective anxiety. This was a case that could make or break their careers. The team gathered in the courtroom before the filing was officially submitted. The room was sterile, quiet, and serious. David walked to the front and spoke briefly to his colleagues. Lily was on edge, standing by David's side, as she watched him calmly address the team, giving them their marching orders. It was strange. She had never seen him so resolute, so certain. His usual calm demeanor had shifted into something else, a quiet, intense focus. This case was personal for him too, though Lily knew he wasn't showing it the way she was. He had seen much worse, fought bigger battles. But Lily could tell that this case had touched something deep within him. It was about more than just winning. It was about righting a wrong that had gone on for far too long. After the short briefing, the team went into action. David handed Lily the first set of legal documents to file with the court. She took the papers, her hands shaking slightly as she moved to the filing desk. Every step felt surreal. This was her life now. She wasn't just sitting behind a desk anymore. She was an active part of the fight. The power to bring Northern Electric to its knees rested in part in her hands. And though the weight of that responsibility was immense, she felt a sense of empowerment she had never known before. With the paperwork submitted, the legal process began. But it wasn't just about the courtroom anymore. It was about the media, the public, and the people of Eastfield. Lily had already begun working with journalists who had shown interest in the case. She knew that Northern Electric had the resources to drag out the legal proceedings, to drown them in legal jargon and court dates. But the one thing they couldn't control was public opinion. Lily made sure the media had everything they needed: photos of the residents, personal stories of loss and illness, and, of course, the documents proving the corporation's guilt. As soon as the case was filed, the media coverage exploded. Local news outlets picked up the story, and soon national networks were calling. Reporters from all over the country were reaching out to Lily and David, eager to learn more about the case. But it wasn't just the press conferences and interviews that were important. It was the growing sense of solidarity among the people of Eastfield. They had suffered in silence for so long, but now they had a voice. They had a legal team that was ready to fight for them, and they had Lily leading the charge. The next few days were a whirlwind. Northern Electric responded quickly, as Lily had expected. They issued a statement denying all allegations and claiming that the water contamination was an accident, a tragic mishap that they were already addressing. They promised to work with local officials to clean up the water supply and insisted that the residents had been misinformed. It was the same story they had been telling for years, but this time no one was buying it. The public was beginning to see through the corporation's lies. Behind the scenes, the legal team was preparing for what would be a long and grueling process. Northern Electric's lawyers were already filing motions to dismiss, trying to delay the proceedings and discredit the case. But David and Lily knew this was just the beginning. They were ready for the fight. They had the evidence, and they had the people of Eastfield behind them. The legal battle had only just begun, but Lily could already feel the momentum shifting. It was no longer just about the legal arguments or the technicalities of the case. It was about justice. It was about showing Northern Electric that they couldn't hide behind their wealth and power. And it was about ensuring that the voices of the people of Eastfield would not be silenced. As she sat in the quiet of the courthouse, Lily reflected on how far she had come. She had started this journey as a simple assistant, someone just trying to make ends meet. But now, she was in the heart of the battle, standing shoulder to shoulder with people who believed in what she was doing. She wasn't just a part of the team anymore. She was leading the charge. And with every step, with every document filed, with every phone call made, she felt more certain than ever that they were going to win. Northern Electric had underestimated her, and they were going to regret it. This was only the beginning, and Lily was ready for whatever came next. Chapter 9. The Trial. The trial had finally begun. Lily stood in the back of the courtroom, her pulse quickening as she looked around at the rows of lawyers, witnesses, and reporters. It had been months of preparation, of gathering evidence, of painstakingly uncovering the truth about Northern Electric's role in poisoning the people of Eastfield. But now, as she watched the trial unfold, everything felt like it was happening in fast forward, and the gravity of the moment hit her all at once. The courtroom was vast, its cold stone walls casting long shadows across the benches. The air felt thick with tension. Lawyers in expensive suits whispered to one another at the table. The judge's gavel remained poised, waiting to bring order to the chaos, and the people of Eastfield sat behind the plaintiff's table, their faces filled with hope but also anxiety. They had waited so long for this moment, their voices finally heard, their pain finally validated. Lily's eyes scanned the room, and she could feel their silent support. This wasn't just her fight, it was theirs too. Every single one of them. David Winters stood at the front, his posture as calm as ever, yet there was a noticeable intensity behind his eyes. Lily couldn't help but admire him. He was a seasoned lawyer with decades of experience, but this case was different. It wasn't just about law, it was about the lives of the people who had been wronged. He had been confident from the start, but today she could see the weight of the case in the way he carried himself. Every word, every decision he made could change the lives of those he was representing. Across the room, at the defendant's table, the representatives of Northern Electric sat in stark contrast. Their lawyers, dressed in sharp suits, appeared unfazed by the seriousness of the case, as if they were certain their financial and political power would shield them from any consequences. Lily could see the cold detachment in their eyes as they whispered and exchanged notes, their posture stiff and unyielding. She wanted to make them feel the weight of the lives they had destroyed, but she knew that would have to come later. Right now, it was about the evidence, about making sure the jury understood what had really happened in Eastfield. The jury sat at the front, their eyes flicking between David's opening statements and the defense's aggressive objections. Lily had seen the jury beforehand, a group of 12 ordinary citizens who would ultimately decide the fate of the case. She had hoped for a jury that could empathize with the people of Eastfield, and from the way they were listening attentively, she felt a sense of cautious optimism. As the trial began, David rose from his seat and moved to the front of the courtroom. He was about to give his opening statement, the first moment of this entire trial that would lay the foundation for everything that came after. The judge nodded for him to begin, and the entire room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," David began, his voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "This case is about more than just water contamination. It's about corporate greed. It's about the lives that have been destroyed for the sake of profit. And it's about holding a corporation accountable for its deliberate actions." Lily watched as David's words hit the room like a hammer. He spoke about the history of Northern Electric's negligence, about how they had knowingly polluted the water supply of Eastfield with toxic chemicals, particularly chromium-6. He outlined the health consequences: cancers, birth defects, chronic illnesses that had taken the lives of parents, children, and entire families. He spoke with such conviction, not just as a lawyer, but as a man who believed in the cause he was fighting for. The more he spoke, the more Lily could feel her own sense of purpose harden, like steel in her chest. David continued, breaking down the details of how Northern Electric had tried to cover up the contamination for years. Internal memos, corporate emails, and health records, each one revealing how the company had hidden the truth from the public, downplayed the severity of the contamination, and even gone so far as to silence whistleblowers. The company had never intended to clean up the mess they had made. They had simply sought to avoid the consequences, no matter how many lives they had destroyed in the process. When David finished his statement, he sat down, and the courtroom was dead silent for a moment. Lily could feel the weight of his words, lingering in the air. It was the beginning of the end for Northern Electric, and they knew it. The defense team immediately stood up, preparing to counter David's accusations. Their lawyer, a tall, sharply dressed man named Victor Caldwell, moved with practiced precision, his eyes cool and calculating. He addressed the jury with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not what it seems. What the plaintiffs want you to believe is that Northern Electric deliberately poisoned the people of Eastfield. But the truth is much more complex. The contamination, if it even happened, was an unfortunate accident, an isolated incident that the company has already taken steps to rectify." Caldwell's words were smooth, calculated, but Lily could feel the falseness of his argument. He tried to play down the seriousness of the contamination, focusing on vague promises of future cleanups and corporate responsibility. But the jury wasn't buying it. Lily could see their skeptical glances. their narrowed eyes as they listened to Caldwell's attempts to minimize the damage. For all his legal prowess, the truth couldn't be hidden by smooth words or polished suits. As the Yao defense continued to present their case, calling experts to testify that the contamination had been a mistake, the room grew tense. But Lily had a feeling that no matter how much the defense tried to spin their narrative, the truth was on their side. They had the evidence. They had the documents. They had the witnesses. Real people whose lives had been shattered by Northern Electric's negligence. The witnesses started taking the stand the following day, and that's when Lily felt the full weight of what they were fighting for. The people of Eastfield took the stand one by one, their voices shaking but resolute as they recounted the horrors they had lived through. They spoke about the cancer that ran rampant in their families, about the birth defects that had left their children struggling to survive, and about the illnesses that had plagued their community for years. They spoke not just of their suffering, but of their anger. Anger that the company had known and done nothing, that their cries for help had been ignored. Margaret Taylor, the elderly woman Lily had spoken to months ago, was one of the first witnesses. She shakily approached the stand, her frail body trembling as she took the oath. But when she started speaking, her voice was strong, filled with the kind of courage that came from years of suffering. "My husband died from cancer," Margaret said, her voice cracking. "He wasn't the only one. So many people in our town have died, and we didn't know why. We didn't know that the water we were drinking, the water we gave to our children, was poisoned." She paused, looking at the defense team, her eyes filled with defiance. "You didn't care about us. You didn't care about our lives. You just wanted to make money." Lily's heart ached as Margaret spoke. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a fight for everything these people had lost. Margaret's words rang out in the courtroom, echoing the pain and frustration that so many others felt. And as Margaret finished, Lily saw the subtle shift in the room. The jury was no longer just listening to testimony, they were feeling it. The defense tried to discredit the witnesses, tried to poke holes in their stories, but it was clear that the jury wasn't buying it. The truth was too powerful. Each testimony, each piece of evidence presented, chipped away at the corporation's facade. By the end of the second week of the trial, Lily felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. They were winning. Slowly, methodically, they were making their case, and the evidence was undeniable. Northern Electric had poisoned the people of Eastfield, and they could no longer hide from the truth. As the trial continued, Lily knew they were nearing the end. The battle wasn't over yet, but they had come too far to back down now. This was her moment. The moment when justice would be served, not just for her, but for the thousands of lives that had been ruined by the company's greed. And she wasn't going to stop until Northern Electric paid for what they had done. Chapter 10. A New Beginning. The courtroom was quieter now. After weeks of emotional testimonies, strategic legal arguments, and intense cross-examinations, the final days of the trial had come. Lily sat in the front row, her heart racing as she watched the judge prepare to deliver his verdict. It had been a long and grueling process, one that had drained every ounce of her energy, but it had also brought clarity and a sense of purpose that she had never known before. No matter the outcome, this journey had changed her. The jury had deliberated for hours. Each day, Lily had grown more anxious, wondering how they would respond to the overwhelming evidence and heart-wrenching testimonies that had been presented. Would they side with Northern Electric and its deep pockets, or would they believe in the voices of Eastfield, the voices of the people who had lived in fear and pain for years? The tension in the room was palpable as everyone awaited the judge's decision. The future of the people of Eastfield, the fate of those whose lives had been devastated by contamination, was now in the hands of 12 strangers. Lily looked over at the people who had become like family to her, the residents of Eastfield who had put their trust in her and David. Margaret Taylor, the woman who had so bravely testified about the death of her husband and the illnesses that had plagued the town, sat beside her daughter, holding her hand tightly. Their faces were a mixture of hope and anxiety, the kind of hope that had carried them through years of suffering, and the kind of anxiety that only a long battle for justice could bring. David stood next to her, his face calm, but his eyes focused and sharp. He had been the one to guide her through this process, but she knew that even he was anxious. He had been in countless trials over his long career, but this one was different. This one was personal. It wasn't just about winning a case. It was about giving these people something they had been denied for so long: justice. It was about making sure the world knew the truth. The judge's voice broke through the silence, signaling that the verdict was about to be announced. Every nerve in Lily's body seemed to be on edge as she leaned forward, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The courtroom held its breath. After considering all the evidence, the testimonies of the plaintiffs and witnesses, and the defense presented by Northern Electric, the judge said, his voice steady but authoritative, "The jury has found in favor of the plaintiffs. Northern Electric is hereby ordered to pay $333 million in damages to the residents of Eastfield for their role in poisoning the water supply and causing irreversible harm to the community." A collective gasp filled the room. For a moment, it felt as though the world had stopped. Lily's heart pounded in her chest as the words sank in. She had known they had a strong case, but hearing the verdict out loud felt surreal. It was more than just a victory. It was a moment of reckoning, A moment where the voices of the people of Eastfield were finally heard, and those who had wronged them were held accountable. She turned to look at Margaret Taylor, whose eyes were wide with disbelief. Her hands flew to her mouth in shock, tears streaming down her face. Beside her, her daughter squeezed her hand. Margaret stood up slowly, her legs shaky, as if she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. But the smile on her face told a different story, a smile of relief, of vindication, and of the first glimmer of hope that had shone through the darkness of Eastfield's suffering. Lily could hardly breathe. She stood up as well, feeling a wave of emotion surge through her. The weight of the past few months, the long hours spent working late into the night, the fear and anxiety about whether they would succeed, all of it came crashing down on her in that one moment. They had done it. They had won. The battle had been long and hard, but justice had prevailed. David stood beside her, his expression unreadable for a moment, before a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. He had been a part of so many legal battles in his career, but Lily knew this was the one that had mattered most to him. He looked over at her, his gaze filled with respect and pride. "We did it," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. As the court began to empty, Lily felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just a victory in the courtroom. It was a victory for everyone who had been silenced, for everyone who had been denied the justice they deserved. The people of Eastfield had been through so much, and now they had a chance to heal. But even as the joy of the moment began to sink in, Lily couldn't help but think about the future. What came next? What did this victory mean in the long run? There was still much work to be done, restoring the town's water supply, supporting the families affected by the contamination, and making sure that Northern Electric's actions were exposed to the world. This victory was only one part of the larger fight. That night, after the court had adjourned, Lily walked outside, her feet carrying her without thought to a quiet park near the courthouse. She had always been someone who kept her emotions tightly controlled, but now, in the cool evening air, she allowed herself a moment to reflect. The weight of the last few months, of the fear, the long nights, and the unrelenting pressure, had finally been lifted. The people of Eastfield had justice, and Lily had helped to make that happen. It wasn't just a professional victory, it was personal. She had become someone who could make a real difference. As she stood on the park bench, staring out at the distant city skyline, she remembered the words she had said to herself months ago, on that quiet evening when she first decided to take action. Today, I will find a way. Today, I will make a change. It had taken everything out of her, her time, her energy, her patience, but she had done it. She had changed the course of Eastfield's future. She had fought for those who had been powerless. And now, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Lily knew that this was just the beginning. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Margaret. "Thank you. Lily," it read. "You gave us back our lives." Lily smiled and typed a quick reply. "No, Margaret. You gave me the strength to keep going. You gave us all a new beginning." The fight was far from over, but for the first time in months, Lily felt something that had been missing for so long: peace. She was ready for whatever came next. Great work today. Every moment you spend practicing brings you closer to mastering your English listening and speaking skills. Remember, progress comes with patience and consistency. If this story inspired you or helped you in your learning journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Easy English Spark channel for more lessons and stories. Keep listening, keep speaking, and keep believing in your growth. I'll see you in the next video. Take care and keep shining.